Sometimes, looking for answers only leads to more questions, and sometimes you're better off not knowing. This is the story of Evil Reptilian, also known as the Survivor Professor, or Luchino Diruse, a man whose unorthodox experiments led to twisted revelations and questions he never expected to answer. Luchino's early life is quite unknown, so we fast forward to his days as a researcher in an unnamed laboratory. Around the age of 35, he had dedicated much of his adulthood to studying nature, biology, and more specifically, herpetology, the scientific study of reptiles and amphibians. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, when the events of IDB seemed to be set, there were many beliefs around reptiles and their medicinal uses, protection against evil spirits, healing various ailments, and more. Perhaps Luchino was drawn to these practices, fueling his passion for these creatures. Luchino's fascination with reptiles led him to become a scientist and researcher with the ambitious goal of learning as much as possible about these animals and applying his discoveries for the benefit of humanity. As we meet him in this story, he has already spent considerable time studying these creatures. He has become obsessed with the idea that reptiles' delicate biology is engraved with the mystery of evolution, as he says. In his character trailer, an image depicts a lizard evolving into a human. Whether this was Luchino's belief is unclear, as debates about humanity's origin were intense during this period, as Darwin's theories had just been released. We do see a mention of his belief in passing in his backstory from the official Identify website that says, "The human beings evolved from monkeys, but how about before monkeys?" This question could lead us to wonder if Luchino thought monkeys came from reptiles, yet I think this question is digging at something deeper that Professor discovers later in life. In his research deduction, Luchino reveals his drive for science. "The feeling we have about this world determines who we are, and the feeling I have about this world is unknown. If a question is not answered satisfactorily, it will keep on lingering in my brain." This insight into Luchino's mindset shows us that he's driven by an insatiable need to understand. The deduction describes this perfectly. It's greed. The greed for knowledge. His determination is evident in his Venom deduction, where he acknowledges the risks of his work, but is also willing to continue if the potential rewards are high enough. His job was indeed dangerous, not just because he worked with venomous animals, but because of his risky methods. In the food tasting deduction, Luchino confirms the effects of the phantasmal poison frog by testing its poison on himself. Although he did initially test on mice, his self-experimentation was careless at times, often using higher doses than necessary. His experiments included studying bearded lizard venom, which caused decreased blood pressure, and the Gila monster's venom, which induces numbness and nausea. Not nice. Luchino was particularly interested in finding a creature with regenerative abilities. "Its tail is thick and strong, but it won't grow back once it's broken off." He sought a reptile or amphibian capable of self-healing, driven by a fascination with evolution and the desire to unlock humanity's next step. He believed he was following the Creator's will, as he mentioned in his background story trailer. "Researching them feels like listening to hymns of heaven, tracing the steps left by the Creator." Dr. Duquesne Thompson, who worked in the same lab, or possibly owned it, announced a call for volunteers to bring unique specimens of reptiles or amphibians to the lab with the promise of a paid reward. This was crucial as Luchino was running out of fresh subjects to test on. However, the relationship between Luchino and Thompson was strained at best, due to Luchino having ruined one of Thompson's business ventures. Thompson might have actually hoped a dangerous specimen would come and harm Luchino, since he seemed to know that he experimented on himself with these dangerous creatures. Luckily for Professor, a janitor called Darren, who worked in the lab, mentioned having found a peculiar snake that could grow 4 legs. He eventually caught and presented it to Dr. Thompson. Thompson then pressured Luchino into studying it, that was described in the temptation deduction. In his lab, Luchino began studying the creature. The trap deduction describes it. "This creature has fully formed forelimbs. Its hind limbs are not fully developed, and there are no outer ear holes on the sides of its head. It's covered in greyish-brown square scales, and the scales on its stomach are bigger than those on its back. We have examined its oral cavity, which has hollow fangs in the anterior part of the maxilla." Initially, the creature's venom seemed ineffective on lab rats, but when Luchino secretly tested it on himself, it had spectacular effects. As detailed in the last passage of a record letter, "The subject exhibited enhanced physical strength and increased sensitivity to smell within 3 to 4 days. However, by the 7th day, green scales started appearing on his skin, and he displayed lizard-like behavior such as sunbathing and heightened nocturnal activity." Luchino was gradually transforming into a lizard man, who we all now know as Evil Reptilian. Panicked at first, Luchino soon adjusted, covering his scales with bandages and continuing his research. He continued his discoveries and analyzed his own behavior, but now he needed to know where this unique and possibly world-changing species came from. Some of this drive to discover the roots of his newfound abilities may not have been his own, as this change was not completely a natural one. Evil Reptilian was also partially aware of this, as we can see that he began to collect newspaper clippings regarding the supernatural. As we can see in his character trailer, two things stand out: the clipping that mentions dark woods and a strange symbol. That strange symbol may seem familiar to you, as it is Dreamwitch's one that she uses when she summons a follower, and her connection to dark woods is incredibly deep. Just take the bonfire Easter egg as proof. Dreamwitch, or maybe one of her family members, was to blame for Luchino's predicament. It becomes more clear when you think about the type of creature that Luchino got the venom from: a snake with greyish-brown scales. We see that on his search for answers, Luchino received a letter inviting him to the manor. As Sia explains in his interaction with Luchino in his own letter, Mr. Diruse didn't say much, but he would respond or concur at times. He said he was a researcher and came here to collect data. Yes, Sia mentions Luchino because, unlike the previous hunters I've mentioned in past videos, Evil Reptilian's story doesn't seem to come to a vague halt upon getting the letter. Instead, we learn that Evil Reptilian, or Professor as we could probably call him, actually participated in 2 separate matches of IDV. Each match is named an experiment by whoever is researching the participants, and Luchino participated in the experiments of Group 6 and Group 6. Yes, there were 2 Group 6s, and I will refer to them as Group 6A and Group 6B. Group 6A consisted of 2 currently unknown test subjects named 6.1 and 6.2. Priestess was named 6.3, Professor 6.4, and Arthur Byers, possibly also known as Arthur Russell, was 6.5. I think the exact contents of this experiment should be talked about in another video, but Arthur Russell is very key here, as his reason for being here is due to him being the person Priestess had hired to investigate some dealings in the lakeside village. There were rumors of cults and sacrifices where the local villagers would sacrifice animals, children, and even virgin women to the lake's supposed entity, who we can assume is probably Feaster or some relative of his. Arthur had hired 2 separate investigators, one of which was the investigator Volker Belgund. Volker had managed to get close to the cult, but just before he could make a full report, he was snatched by the cult and then sacrificed. Now, Volker is even more important to Luchino's story, as Volker is the brother of Darren Belgund, the janitor that had supplied Luchino with the reptilian specimen that gave him his new powers. This snake had been lurking around the brother's mother's house, and Volker had intended to do something about it, before he died of course. We see that Dreamwitch might have been orchestrating Luchino's entire story since the beginning. Before Volker was able to deal with the snake, he died, and his brother became the sole carer for his mother. He struggled to make ends meet without his brother's income, and that's when the news of Dr. Thompson's request for a new reptile specimen reached him. Convenient? I think a little too much. What better way to make some money to support his mother than giving the reptile to Dr. Thompson, and thus to Luchino? Sadly, Darren the janitor went missing, the exact same night Luchino went missing. After Volker died, Arthur then hired another investigator to go and probe around Lakeside Village. This investigator found a large green scale at the sacrifice scene, similar to those found in the lab where Luchino disappeared. However, Arthur didn't survive long enough for this discovery to be of meaning, as only Luchino emerged alive from Group 6A. As we read, "The 5 missing persons from Group 6 have ceased to exist, both in terms of vital signs and physical existence. Subject 614 is the only remaining test subject. Perhaps it's due to his moderate curiosity towards the unknown that made the unknown reciprocate with moderate care." Luchino had survived due to his moderate curiosity toward the unknown? What does that even mean? Well, the experiment of 6A was centered around the entity of the lake of Lakeside Village, and it seems that that entity had taken a certain liking to our little reptilian friend, maybe due to his complex mind now that he was part scientist and part beast. After this first experience though, Luchino's mind began to unravel as his eyes were open to a world beyond science. This being of the lake blew all of his knowledge and understanding of the world out of the water. His participation in Group 6 was apparently his last, and although he was seemingly acting the same as ever towards the participants, he knew his end was near, as he wrote, "I encountered an unknown force during this trip. and it erased reality in a way beyond human understanding. I met a prophet and witnessed a future that the power of man could not undo. I discovered something akin to medicine that exceeded my understanding, and at this very moment it is eating away at my sanity. This may be my final record, but it does not sadden me. I've done my best to go further on the path to knowledge, and I finally understand that those researchers who regret failing to find the answers are laughable. After all, there was never a true answer in this world. If you ask me, my only regret is probably being unable to name that creature myself.